First and foremost, I want to express our deepest condolences to the families of the victims of yesterday's traumatic event. Last night, the communities of Garden Grove and Santa Ana were preyed upon by violent individuals who had no remorse or care for the safety of anyone other than himself. As the violent acts continued, the Garden Grove Police Department deployed all personnel to the area. We activated elements of our SWAT team that specialize in the apprehension of dangerous and violent suspects. Undercover detectives located the suspect's vehicle in front of the 7-Eleven, which was located at Harbor and First Street in the city of Santa Ana. As the SWAT team and undercover investigators began to converge in the parking lot, the suspect exited the 7-Eleven armed with a handgun and a large knife. As officers began to give commands, the suspect quickly dropped the weapons and surrendered to officers. It is my belief that the Garden Grove police officers' response and apprehension of this individual saved the lives of many other community members. I would like to commend the Garden Grove Police Department for their quick thinking, coordination, and teamwork that unfolded during this chaotic event. It was nothing less than outstanding. Had the suspect continued his rampage, he could have injured or killed many other innocent people. In addition, I would like to thank our local and federal law enforcement partners for their support and assistance during this tragic event. They were quick to offer any resources that were needed by our department. This suspect is identified as Zachary Castaneda, who has been identified as a documented gang member. This person should have been in prison and not allowed to be in our community committing these violent acts. Based upon his prior arrest record, he is a violent individual who should have never been considered for early release based upon Assembly Bill 109. As a police chief, I implore our policymakers to reevaluate their policies on criminal justice. The pendulum has swung so far that it is increasingly difficult to keep our community safe from the rise in violent crime. California law enforcement agencies have been crippled by Assembly Bill 109, and offenders are not being held accountable for their crimes. Our community becomes vulnerable when these criminals are released back into society and are able to commit further acts of violence. Again, our thoughts and prayers are with the families of the victims of this violent act.
4:23 p.m., we received a call of an armed robbery in progress at a bakery located at 13040 Chapman Avenue in the city of Garden Grove. A male, later described as Mr. Castaneda, went into the business and he threatened the clerk with either a gun or a knife and took cash. The suspect fled that location and returned to his home at the apartment complex where the homicides took place on Jinches at 12612. We believe what happened was the two victims that had been victimized during the residential burglary confronted the suspect as he returned because they lived in adjacent apartments. An altercation occurred between our suspect and our two victims, and our two victims were ultimately stabbed and succumbed to their injuries at the apartment complex. We received a call, arrived on scene, and found both victims down in front of the apartment, one on the balcony, one inside the apartment. One victim was transported to UCI Hospital, where he died from his injuries. After the homicide, we had the robbery happen, we had the homicide going on. We received a phone call back to our communications center at 5:39 p.m. about another armed robbery matching the same suspect description. This robbery occurred at the Cash and More business located at 12845 Chapman. Our suspect went into that business, threatened the clerk with a knife, and took cash and fled the scene. So now we have two robberies and we have the double homicide happening, and it's draining our resources here in Garden Grove. At 6:06 p.m., another armed robbery happened at Best One Insurance. This was a savage attack. I'm going to release this video later on where it shows the victim, a 54-year-old employee inside the business, was doing her daily operations of her business, sitting at her desk, feeling safe inside a business. Nobody expects to go to an insurance company to be attacked and almost killed at the time. Our suspect walks into the business, confronts the female victim, and without provocation, he stabs her multiple times. I'll release this video after this press conference today. After that stabbing happened, there was a check cashing business in the back of the same insurance company. That female victim threw cash at the suspect. He took the cash and fled the business. After that attempted murder and robbery, we received another phone call at 6:09 p.m. from a person reporting a stabbing that happened at the Chevron station, which is near Harbor and Banner in Garden Grove, just north of the 22 freeway. Our 44-year-old male Hispanic victim was pumping gas. Our suspect was also getting gas at the same location. Sometime during this altercation, our suspect produced 2 large machete knives, attacked our guy who was pumping gas into his truck, nearly severing his nose off and stabbing him in the back. Our suspect, at that time, after he attacked this guy savagely, returned to his vehicle, finished pumping gas, filled off his tank, and then he drove off southbound on Harbor Boulevard towards the city of Santa Ana. At this time, we're making radio announcements across the Orange County. We're asking for assistance from other agencies to be on the lookout for this suspect. Our undercover detectives who were here at the station suited up, put their vest on, and went out hunting for this individual. We had no indication where this guy was going to go, but our detectives were on spot and went looking for this suspect. A short time later, our detectives found our suspect vehicle at the 7-Eleven at Harbor and First Street in the city of Santa Ana. Within a minute of locating the vehicle, our suspect came out of the 7-Eleven store armed with a handgun and a large knife. Our detectives drew their weapons onto the suspect, ordered him to drop his weapons. He complied. He threw the gun down, threw the knife down, and he was taken into custody. At that same time, customers came out of the 7-Eleven store, said that the security guard inside had been stabbed and needed help. Our officers diverted into the store, started life-saving measures on this individual, started doing CPR, but unfortunately the security guard later died at the hospital. We learned that the security guard inside the business was followed by this suspect, was attacked from behind with a large knife, dropping the security guard to the floor. After he was stabbed numerous times, our suspect used his large knife and cut the weapon, the gun off the security guard's gun belt. That's the gun he walked out of the store with. If not for our undercover officers stopping this individual coming out armed with a handgun and knives, there would have been more loss of life in the city of Garden Grove or Santa Ana. After this, we learned that at the subway across the street from the 7-Eleven, we learned that there was another homicide where an innocent victim was attacked by the same suspect. So what we have right now, 4 needless homicides happened here in Garden Grove and Santa Ana. The flags behind me are at half staff. That's for the needless violence that's happening across the United States. This violence has to stop. And we're here in a collaborated effort together to try and stop this violence in Garden Grove. So our detectives, our officers, our city council, our lawmakers behind us are all together to stop this needless violence in Orange County. We interviewed the suspect. He continued to fight our detectives through the night. Several times he had to be tamed, he had to be hobble restrained. He remained violent with us through the night. He never told us why he did this. We know at 3 locations he robbed people for cash, so we don't know if the motive behind this was purely for robbery, but there was no indication that this was a hate crime. We just know this was a random act of violence, and the guy unleashed evil across our 2 counties, or 2 cities. I don't know his exact release date. We're working on that timeline right now, but I know he has a violent past, he has gang associations, and we're working on his criminal history right now. What she said was we responded to the burglary call. That didn't happen. That call was still pending. We arrived on scene after we received the phone call for the 2 homicides. When we arrived on scene, we realized that the earlier burglary call was related to the homicide.
So when it comes to these crimes, one after another, you have to prioritize because your resources are being granted. Is that just
As things were happening, it was so dynamic, it was so rapid, with all these violent crimes happening across Garden Grove, we had to pull detectives who were also already working a homicide. They had to leave their desk, suit up, and head out to the field to assist our officers with all these different crime scenes.